Good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, September 17th, 2019. This is the regular monthly meeting of the CFAC, the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee, and we are located here in Morro Bay at Vets Hall. We have a quorum of 6 of our 7 members present, so I'll call the meeting to order. We'll have a moment of silence, please. Okay, please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Do we have any committee member announcements, or we don't have presentations because they're not?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
The Community Foundation of Estero Bay, which is the organization that provides financial support to underprivileged kids who would like to play sports in Morro Bay, Los Osos, and Cayucas, is having our annual fundraising event on October 12th at the Veterans Hall. At the Community Center. You can buy tickets at the door. It's dinner and entertainment. The theme this year are the Beach Boys. There's a live and silent auction with some pretty cool stuff, including a week in Hawaii, a week in Mexico, some prime tickets to the Warriors games, to the Giants games. So please feel free to come and support our organization, which supports the children. Thank you. 5.
Thank you, Homer. Okay, any other announcements? All right, thank you. I'll open up the public comment period. Members of the audience wishing to address the committee on any business matters not on the agenda or matters on the agenda for which you do not want to stay for the duration of the meeting may do so at this time. I'll also call for public comment when we go through our calendar. So any public comment at this point? Okay, thank you. I'll close public comment. We will begin with item A1 on the consent calendar. That was the approval of the minutes from last meeting on August 20th, 2019. I had 1 or 2 suggestions, Tracy, if you don't mind. They're just minor typos. Just for correction, item B3, it says the member was seconded, and we meant to say the motion was seconded. That's item B3 under motion. And also, on section D of the minutes, I see that we had the start time at 3 o'clock. It should be 3:30. That's what today's start time is. And any other corrections or anything on the minutes? Jennifer, did you relay our request to council to begin our meeting 30 minutes earlier?
That will go to the ad hoc committee that was established with any other recommendations that you make tonight. Okay, so just for everybody's clarification, in the interim, because there's other things that have to happen, we can't just change a meeting, and with AGP in the schedule, that will go to the City Council ad hoc committee looking at all of this for the advisory boards. In the interim, it's still 3:30 until we hear back that they have approved our request to begin at 3 o'clock. Thank you. All right, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as updated? Thank you, Bill. Second, please. Anyone?
I'll second.
Homer Alexander has seconded. Bill Bowes made the motion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you. All right, that brings us to item B1, a brief finance update. That's our finance director, Jennifer. Please proceed.
I'm going to be extremely brief today. We are past our 60-day open period for our accounts payable and are starting and initiating the year-end close. Our auditors are scheduled to be here at the end of October this year. So we have a few weeks to get everything wrapped up for that.
So that would be the audit of the 2019-2020 fiscal year budget expenditures ending June 30th, 2019, correct?
18-19, fiscal year 18-19.
Oh, 2018, 2019.
Yep.
I'm sorry, what am I
Yep.
thinking? Okay, that's the previous fiscal year. Okay, thanks. Jennifer, at our last meeting, we discussed the budget in brief, and one of our members made some suggestions. Can you provide us an update on that, please?
I am going on holiday starting tomorrow, and it'll be the first thing I do when I get back next week.
Okay, all right, so we'll do that, and then I didn't see it online.
I'll provide copies for you at your next meeting and get it online next week.
Okay, perfect, thank you. All right, anything else on item B1? Moving right along, item B2, receive the fourth quarter investment report. The recommendation is receive the fourth quarter investment report for the fiscal year ending 2018-2019, and that's included in your agenda packet. So, Jennifer, do you have any comments on that, or?
Just a couple comments. Our portfolio is earning on average above 2% at this point, which is pretty good. We've recorded $455,000 in interest for the year. As a reminder, we record that to the general fund, but it gets allocated out as one of our last entries we do at year end based on cash balances in those funds. So that $455,000 will not all stay in the general fund. A substantial portion of that will end up in the water and sewer funds because they have the highest cash balances. And then as a matter of record keeping, we heard the third quarter report in front of this committee in May. We realized it never went to council. So the third quarter and the fourth quarter reports are going to go to council on Tuesday at the September 24th meeting, unless there's any objections to the fourth quarter, and then we'll pull that. But apologies for that. We couldn't. So I went to upload it to our website. I couldn't find where it actually went to council. So just an oversight on our part.
Okay, and we've discussed the investment report before because some of them are in lower yielding revenue in order to keep a higher cash balance because the water reclamation facility. Any comments or discussion up here, or do we want to, before, and then I'll open it to public comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a question, comment. A big reason for keeping a high balance is because of the cash flow issues with WRF, which is understandable because of getting reimbursements from where the funds are. I seem to recall there was going to be a study, possibly by the person doing the rates, to basically plot out, when expenditures should be there relative to the schedule and schedule of getting invoices. What is happening with that study?
So that's correct. We have a contract. We executed a new contract with Barter Wells. That's the company that did our rate study. They're going to be doing an analysis of not only our cash flow, but our loan amounts because of the increased expected amount that we were awarded from SRF, and that's at a lower interest rate. So doing an analysis of how much to take from both the WRF and the SRF. We are in the process of getting our final bond rating from SAP, and part of that is providing them with updated financials, which is all part of that same analysis. So he's working on that as we speak.
There was a blue ribbon committee identified with the last rate analysis. Is there going to be any input from advisory groups, such as reconstructing the Blue Ribbon Committee, to look at the work they're doing now?
I'm not aware of any at this point. That our city manager will be joining us in a little bit. He can maybe speak to that, but we haven't had those discussions. There's no impact at this point to the rates, and that's what the Blue Ribbon Committee was looking at with respect to the WRF. So I don't anticipate that, but I may not be aware of it.
So basically, that's the city manager's prerogative, and if there's some impact that they feel a special committee other than this or any other committee could comment on or analyze, then that would be he would establish that. So thanks, Bart. Good comments.
Can we make a recommendation if there should be? I mean, it is the citizens are paying the rates, and you would like to have a greater
So you-
visibility of the citizens as to what the rate analysis is, what the criteria was for, or is being given. for
I'm
the
going to
rate
have to
analysis.
stop you because that's off topic of what this item is. So from a Brown Act perspective, this is the investment report. We're not making recommendations on the wharf rates at this agenda item.
I was just commenting on a comment that Bart made.
Well, there is a connection. Clearly, your discussion clearly points out the major need for cash is the Wharf project. So I think it is germane to the words you put in your report.
I think if you're going to have a discussion about that, it falls better under recommendations that you wish to make under item 4. That's a broader topic.
Fair enough. Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Homer.
When do you anticipate completing the reimbursement request for the $10.3 million planning loan?
We're in progress. They take about 3-ish months to get back. So it will be sometime early next year. We've been told it will roll over into our construction loan agreement, and we're getting that in writing.
So are you, I guess what I'm trying to figure out, are you anticipating receiving $10 million in the first quarter?
No. The first quarter that ends in a couple weeks?
No, sorry, not. I apologize. The private sector first quarter.
We won't, at this point, I'm not even sure we have $10 million in planning costs that we've incurred yet. We're rapidly accruing those, but I'm not sure we have that much at this point. I would say first quarter, you mean March 30th, 31st?
Yeah, right.
We'd have a substantial portion by then, if not all.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you.
John.
Well, first thing, Jennifer, it looks like you have about $4.5 million more in your portfolio, in your investment portfolio than June 30th of last year, which is a good sign. And I just had a question for you about the Rabobank accounts. Will the merger between Rabobank and Mechanics Bank have any impact on the city, or is that just kind of a name change thing?
We've had conversations with our representatives there. Right now, it's a name change, and there's been no impact to us. We don't expect there to be. We've had conversations with them about how we will process any cannabis money and that sort of thing, because that's been an issue with different banks. And we are all set under the old Rabo and now Mechanics. They're not changing any of their practices.
Thank you, John. Lowe's? No, Bill? Open up for public comment. Any public comment on item B2, the investment report? Please come forward, state your name, but that's not required, and city of residence if you'd like. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Barry Brannon, Morro Bay. Thank you for the report. $455,000 worth of interest is wonderful, and I'm pleased to see that it'll be allocated to the amount of cash in each one of the residual funds. And you said a great deal of it would go into the enterprise funds. Is there any way you can give us kind of a rough breakdown? For example, will $200,000 of that money go to the enterprise funds, or is there any way you can kind of give us off the top of your numbers? Or I don't have the reports, and I was just wondering if you could share that with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Any other public comment? Staff, do we have any response to the public comment on the allocation?
I don't have a breakdown right now, but certainly as we close the year end, we'd be able to provide that. It'll be in all the financials and will be updated in OpenGov as well. So about another 2 months, and I'd give you a pretty solid number.
Okay. That's the breakdown of the interest generated this year. Okay, thank you.
I have one comment. That
Oh,
might
go
help.
ahead.
I happened to save the report you provided us last year, and if it means anything, last year's interest rate was $231,704.51, and a good portion went to the enterprise funds. So this is more than double, right?
Exactly, almost double, yeah, but very good. Good point. All All right, so that brings us to item B3, the preliminary budget performance report for the period ending June 30th, the last fiscal year. And I know the caveat is that there are a lot of year-end transfers and cleanup and journal entries, et cetera. We go through this every single year. So some things may look out of whack. I noticed some of you sent some very good questions, and Ms. Callaway answered them all. But let's go through that. Jennifer, if you want to start with any preliminary, and then we'll just kind of go through, starting with revenue and then expenses.
So I'm not sure we want to go through detail. I think I really struggled with putting this in there, and I know Mr. Alexander had requested, and the committee seemed to agree. I'm hoping the value out of this, as you can see, from now until we give you year-end report in November, how drastically they change because of all the year-end entries that we have to make. So if you look at it now, it shows we're about $1.5 million, I think, ahead in the general fund. The day after I printed this, we accrued some receivables, and it changed to about $2 million, and we still have some AP stuff coming through that we're having to journal back, and then all the year-end entries. So these are living documents, and they change significantly, so do not, I repeat, do not expect to see $1.5 million in the general fund emergency reserves because of what this report says. You have $500,000 almost in interest that mostly is going to get allocated out to those enterprise funds. There's interfund transfers we haven't done yet. Our first process is to go through and look at all of the things that don't seem to make sense based on budget and kind of see why they don't make sense. Did something get charged somewhere else? Did we actually have savings? That's what we're doing right now, in addition to building all of the compensated absences and those kind of spreadsheets for the journal entries. So I'm hoping that's what you can get out of this. There's some line items here and there that are pretty standard and won't change, but at this time of the year, this kind of report will change daily as we post entries.
Thank you. And the questions that I noticed, or the same ones I had, were really not more on the percentages of over, under, spent or funded. It was more on the magnitude. I was focusing on, higher dollar ones. And there were a couple departments that were actually under spent, the Public Works, I think, and maybe Community Services. But you could see there was going to be some adjustments. So thanks for trying to answer those questions. Before I open up to public comment, any thoughts or any big questions here of significance?
It would be helpful to have a roll-up just by department, what the expenses are and what total revenue, and then what the various fund revenues are as well. I just think looking at these data, I really applaud the work that you've done. Audit expenses are quite a bit less than they were previously. Accounting expenses were less. I think it's good, and I'm not sure if the police department runs lower than what the budget was. The fire department's running lower than the budget. When I read these numbers, I said, gee, it looks like we're going to have a pretty good year. But I don't know which direction these changes will come. But where we are right now, is there a roll-up net positive or negative from revenue minus expenses without the enterprise funds?
So the report that you have in front of you is just the general fund. So on the last page, it kind of shows you, it's page 34 of the packet, shows you under the YTD transactions at the bottom of that page that we have $1.5 million in revenues over expenditures at this point as of this date. Again, they change so frequently. You mentioned auditing is lower, and that's, we had an invoice come in for that afterwards that we'll be journaling back. So it is a very fluid document. You will likely see this being, I do expect to close the year ahead because of some, we've had staffing changes and transitions that resulted in vacancies, and we have savings from that. We will have surplus, but it's going to be more, my estimate at this time is maybe a couple $100,000. Certainly not to the tune of $1.5 million. I didn't do any other detailed roll-up of this because is meaningless in another hour as we do journal entries. So it's just not how we do it at this time of the year.
But I think it is sorted by, to his question on the departments and that, the street and.
Yeah, I missed
broken
the
down.
end of it, yeah.
It's all there. And the other thing is, in terms of the last meeting where we had a training hour session on the Open Gov, where you can also, if you don't like the sort of this, or it doesn't make sense, or you're interested, anybody in the public can have access to that and database and generate reports they'd like that way. So I thought it was. And again, maybe I'm operating a little more from 10 years of history when we used to get data dumps that were in excess of 700 pages of this report. Now we have it down to 25, so I'm thinking it looks great. So, but maybe that's too much history. Please, Lois.
It seemed to me like rental revenue was down quite a bit. Is there a reason for that, or is that also something that hasn't yet been posted?
There's a couple different rental income categories. If you look on page 11 of the packet or page 2 of the performance report, there's a rental income department. We hadn't budgeted our rental income there. We had it in, I think, our accounting and treasury, but it had been posted there. So you'll see there was about $30,000 in rental income there where there was no budget. And those are the type of things we go through and reconcile.
So it's just an offset. There's no shortfall in expected revenue to actual revenue in rental income?
I believe facility rentals were down. That's in recreation as compared to budget. We have 2 facilities. We have our house on Dunes?
Dunes.
Shasta Dunes, yes, our house on Dunes. That's not rented at this point, but I believe we didn't account for at least a full year of rent. And then Market Street is being rented, but at a reduced rate. So there's probably a little bit of shortage there, but not as, I don't think, as drastic as it's shown on here.
Thank you for explaining that.
Any other comments, gentlemen? John?
So, Jennifer, who in your office reviews these detailed reports and tracks down or chases down the variances?
Sandy has started to do that, and then I will go through as well and do that, and Valerie to some extent does too. We're bringing her in more for succession planning so she can start to understand what those processes are too. And then sometimes it's a hands-on effort to go ask the questions with the various departments and see what happened in some cases.
Okay, and is that done periodically during the year?
We usually are having the similar conversations when we do our quarterly reports. But every quarter there seems to be something different that comes up, and then at year end, we'll catch big differences that maybe didn't show up during the quarterly.
So you wouldn't expect that variances that show up in this report would be from, 9 months ago or 6 months ago or something like that. Those would have already been found.
In most cases, maybe an example of this, if you look at that last page, we have in our interfund transfers out to our internal service funds. Those we typically don't do until the last quarter when we're doing some of our final journal entries. So that, we recognize that each time we did our quarterly performance reports, but we didn't address it until now. And so we'll look at it. I think there was $30,000 maybe budgeted to compensated absences. If we don't need to do that because our compensated absences are already ahead, we would recommend not doing that when we come back with some final budget adjustments. But those are the types of things that we'll look at. And that, that's a pretty significant number that's not included in here at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer, is there a reason we don't look at the capital budget at this point in time, or is that going to happen later?
You will get all of those with year end. Again, this is kind of an exception. Last year we didn't do this kind of September reporting, so I just included general fund at this time.
And we always review that in the preview of the next year's total budget, the operating budget and everything, so.
So at our November meeting, we'll receive the budget performance reports for the entire city?
You'll get a budget year-end update. I'm not sure if we'll give you, if you like these reports, we can give them to you, but that's when you get into 74 pages with the
Well, that's
various
not any
funds.
extra work on your part, is it, other than somebody scanning them?
No, I just PDF them.
Yeah.
As long as you don't have to print them, I guess.
Yeah, I would like to see the budget performance report for the entire year.
Okay.
We also have a review of the audit, too, so year-end, so, but that's certainly a reasonable request.
This is in January you're talking about? Is that what we're talking about, in the January timeframe, after we
November,
get the
December,
audit? or
January.
You're saying
So about November time, we start
that's when we'll get it
talking.
back from the auditor at that time?
Well, we start having conversations about the CAFR in November. We have our draft, fingers crossed, CAFR in November that we're working on. And during that meeting, you usually get a preliminary Measure Q year-end update about where we are closing Measure Q. And I'm hearing that you'd like the budget performance report for all the funds.
So, Bill, it's just basically this report, except with final numbers, and it includes everything.
Enterprise funds, everything.
Yeah.
We do have a lot at year-end, but if this is not cost prohibitive for the city and you're just PDFing it, then the members that would like to review the 740 pages in addition to everything else are welcome to do it over the holidays.
It's not the transaction report. It's not 700 pages. It'll be
Used
about
to be.
40.
We'll see. Okay. But anyways, and that's when we do the Measure Q and everything else, and then the auditor's report, so. Okay. Any other comments up here? Anything from the, I can open up a public comment if anybody would like to comment on item B3, the preliminary budget performance report. Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to item B4. Item B4 is discussion of the role of the CFAC committee in reviewing the city budget, Measure Q spending, and the water reclamation facility finances, including reporting of findings on action items to the city council with recommendation to the council ad hoc committee for consideration.
So I'm just going to start out maybe the conversation a little bit.
Okay, that would help, sure.
I don't think it was the previous council meeting, but in one of the recent council meetings, I think it was the last one, an ad hoc subcommittee was formed to review advisory board roles in the handbook, and that subcommittee will be meeting. So you already have the recommendation to move the committee meeting time to 3 o'clock. We'll share that with the advisory board for them to consider, and they'll ultimately make a recommendation to the council for discussion. The committee is reviewing all of the advisory boards. I think citywide, it's fair to say that we are kind of maxed out on what we can take on. So to the extent that you have questions on clarifying your role with regard to something, adding anything new onto the committee, those will be shared with the ad hoc committee, but I just want to caution that there's going to probably have to be choices made if it's new roles as to what staff can even take on to support. So if there's multiple things, we might want to rank those in order of priority to share that with the committee. And then when the ad hoc committee meets, again, they'll take that under advisement, recognizing what capacity there is to take on things, and then sharing their recommendations with the council for discussion. So keeping that in mind, this is your chance to, we're not talking about the details of individual things, we're talking about your roles, what you feel you need to complete those roles if you're not clear on what those roles are, and then how you wish to communicate your recommendations to the council.
Okay, so
Jennifer,
thanks for putting a little bit in the framework. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, regarding the ad hoc committee, when will they meet? Will they have minutes or agendas published and advertised, or is this just a subcommittee that's doing this committee by committee?
This is the ad hoc committee is a subcommittee of 2 council members, so it's not a Brown Act requirement.
Wonderful.
But of course, when their recommendations are discussed at City Council, that'll be the point where public discussion can ensue. This committee could come and speak either as members of the committee or as if you have a statement as a whole, and members of the public as well.
So anything that we may decide today and in the form of a motion can that go to the city council, or must it go to this ad hoc committee? If the motion has nothing to do with changing responsibilities, it's just clarifying what we do, for example.
So to the extent that you're going to make motions today, they will go to the ad hoc committee. That doesn't preclude them from being shared, of course, with the whole council during that discussion at that time. But the first step is for the ad hoc committee to consider what you're recommending, and then they'll make a recommendation to council.
Is there a time frame for that?
I'm not aware of what the time frame is yet. There's at least another month or so before it would get onto an October schedule, and that would be the end of October if possible. So I know our next October meeting is full at this point.
It just seems, if you look at the bylaws, which I have, of course, and read through the things that we're supposed to do, and just making sure that's what the city council expects, and they talk about in here that we should report to the city council our findings. So I don't think some of the motions that we may make today really need to go through an ad hoc committee, because they're really not changing anything. It's just clarifying things we do.
Maybe. I have a suggestion, Madam Chair. Attached, the handout is, I got one.
I have one. I brought it because I occasionally refer to it.
Is a list from the handbook of our responsibilities. We got paper of the world here. My suggestion would be, why don't we go down this list and say, yeah, that makes sense, we should do that, or no, we're not going to be able to do it because we're not interested, or maybe because the city doesn't want to share some of the detailed information that we might want to look at. I don't know. It's just a suggestion. So do you want to lead this, Barbara?
Yeah, well, I want to make a couple comments. I have previously commented to City Council that I felt some of this in our policy statement was not updated, should be updated, and initially I didn't think we were doing all this, and I didn't think we had the expertise or the time or the staff support to do it all. So as a result of that and some other comments I had made to City Council, they finally got it on an agenda item, and that's where this ad hoc committee, I believe, emanated from. So we're going to give them some recommendations. We might give them some recommendations based on their discussion today that they might think applies to all of the committees, and take that ad hoc committee under consideration, and they can, ratchet it up to council and see what council. Or we might give them some things, as Homer is suggesting, on our duties as to what we think we can do. But I think we really have to keep in mind how much work we're requiring from the staff to do it, and because I know what city council member will respond back, well, what's the return on investment? So, and at a higher level, let's talk about what this committee was formed originally to do, the Measure Q oversight, and then because of our expertise, it was expanded to do some more things finance related. And I think now we're struggling a little with what should our role be, how much detail should we be down in the weeds, so to speak, or should we be at a high level? Should we just be looking at $1 million transactions or $2 transactions? So we kind of have to keep all that in the back of our mind as we have this discussion. So Homer has a suggestion that we should look through our 10 or 11 duties here and see if those are, is that what you're?
Yes, the only comment I want to make is item number 11. That was established by the vote of the people, so
that's not for discussion.
That's not for discussion.
Right. Exactly. Jennifer, are you agreeable with if we do a quick look of our duties and what we think we might want to do? Is that consistent with the item B4 agenda item?
I think that's exactly what B4 is, and
okay.
Other than that opening, I'm not really going to plan to say much and let you guys
fine.
make your recommendations.
Did we have some extra copies we could give?
I'm looking at it online, so I think we're okay.
Oh, yeah. Here's a few. Let me keep one in case I want to. Okay, So the first one is the annual review of the independent financial audit with recommendations as appropriate. We have been doing that the last couple years after the auditor's report. Any comments, suggestion on that? Seems appropriate for this committee?
I recommend we go through each one. Could take a long time and only comment if we don't agree with.
Okay, then
Or
what
if
do we
we
do?
see an
Fine.
opportunity to save some time and combine a
Okay.
couple of these.
Just in looking at this, many of them seem to be sort of the subject of the budget and review, and then restated about 7 different ways.
Yeah,
to make,
interrelated, I would agree.
and it makes it seem like there's 11, and there's, the first one is separate, the last one is separate, but then the others seem like they're all the same subject, just slightly worded differently. I don't know.
Except for number 17.
Okay, but
There are a few different ones. Number 2,
Go ahead.
I'm not sure that we would ever get the information necessary to comment on it, so I think we should just strike number 2 is my recommendation.
Number 2 is annual review of contract expenditures with recommendations as appropriate. We had some discussions on that from the purchasing policy and that of the city, but we, in my opinion, have not been doing that on a regular basis. The city has their procurement policy. Those policies have been reviewed and updated recently, and so I don't think we should be doing that. Those expenditures are all buried in the budget and the actuals anyway, so it's just duplicate work. So I would agree with Homer's and Bill's suggestion that we just strike that. That will be part of our summary recommendation here. Any others? Anybody would like to see any changes to?
I think 3 is just really reviewing the budget.
Well, I'd like to
normal outcome.
I'd like to reword that a little bit.
All right. Well, I'm sorry, what were you saying, Bill? Strike it,
I'm
or?
just saying number 3 really is embodied in just doing an annual review of the budget. What we're talking about is reviewing the budget and making reports to the city council if we find any anomalies or concerns.
I'd like to recommend that we delete the words existing budget and replace it with the 10-year forecast. That's become a document that a lot of decisions are being made on.
Well, if the goal is to determine the long-term financial sustainability, the 10-year
Well, that's
is
exactly why.
relevant then.
Yes.
John, Bart, any thoughts? You're okay? 10-year forecast and delete existing budget. Thank you. Other thoughts, comments?
Is number 4 okay?
Well, number 4, I think, is probably unrealistic. We're never going to get to review it prior to the city manager. I mean, it's just...
Let me give you the history on that.
Right.
And yeah, you're right, spot on, Bill. That was a previous city manager that invited, which is okay, that invited CFAC members to their internal staff presentations, and we would rotate. And part of that was really a training, or maybe not even a training, but hey, you're welcome to come in, and I would ask people, don't have too many comments to say this is this internal staff, but that's where that came from. The reality is, I don't think you have the horsepower to do that right now. So,
Can we make a recommendations to just delete the words prior to presenting to city manager? I mean, because we've always reviewed the mid-year adjustments.
It should be done before presentation to the city council.
Yeah, right.
So just strike manager and
Put
replace it
council?
with council.
Yes.
Lois, you're in agreement with that? Bill, you okay with that, or you still want?
Yeah, well, you could just take number 5 says review the annual budget to the city council, put the annual and the semi-annual budget prior to the city council. Just combine the 2.
Combine 4 and 5 and make it,
Yeah.
we can do that.
And just strike 4.
I like the when possible. Number 6 we're already doing?
Oh, we're already doing that. Review and provide comments on routine quarterly financial reports.
So actually, can I interrupt here? Because the when possible raises an interesting conundrum that comes up at certain points. We meet once a month as a committee. There are things that may come up next week, that if it doesn't say when possible, would have to wait a month, and maybe that's not the most efficient practice. So example, our third quarter budget performance report came to this committee in July or August, and then went to the council after that. We couldn't take it to the council before coming here, so there was a little bit longer of a delay to getting in council. That's one example. If we're going to talk about contract reviews, there might be instances where it's not in the best interest of the city to wait a month to come to this committee and then another week to get on a council.
Well, we deleted contract reviews. Maybe this is a question you should pose to the ad hoc committee. You know, before the quarterly reports are submitted to the city council, should this committee review them first?
Well, I think that was something that came up in 2018. I think the current mayor made the suggestion, if I remember correctly, that those come to council and specifically added the council specifically added when possible in order to prevent further delays that may occur from doing that. So if it means that we can come to you and then go to council without there being work delays or impact delays for that, it absolutely makes sense. But there might be some times when it's just not practical or possible because of the timing of when things come up. That was why it was added. I just wanted, since you commented on that, to kind of discuss it a little bit.
Yeah, or if we don't have a quorum or something like that. I'm okay with the when possible, with the understanding that we do report to council and serve at the pleasure of council, so they could call a special meeting if it were a significant item that they wanted input from the advisory committee, or they could go ahead and sometimes they'll have to make an emergency decision or just a normal routine business decision that can't be delayed 4 to 5 weeks.
I guess I'd also add on to that, when you think about their investment reports, you may choose to report to the council differently with today's discussion, but investment reports, our quarterly reports, we include in our staff reports that it was presented to the committee on such and such a date, and whatever your feedback was, we also include if it was not. So, you know, with the example of the third quarter report, we would say this hadn't been shared with the committee due to timing. So the council is aware if it does or does not come.
Number 7?
Yeah, number 7. So number 6 we'll leave as is. We'll pose the question. But
Yeah, the city council doesn't want us to look at it before they look at it. That's fine.
yeah, that's their prerogative.
Their choice.
That's their decision, yeah. And again, it's only a recommendation, so go ahead, 7.
I'm inclined to say we just strike 7.
Well, does work fall under that?
Special financial projects as
That's
directed
gonna
by
be
the
a-
city council, city manager, or city treasurer.
Number 10A.
What's your reason?
Yeah, what's your reason?
Well, we're supposed to, they're complaining that we're, overworked, we're overworking the staff, we're doing all these things. And this is supposed to be our work plan that we do once a year, and that's what they want us to do. So, if these are our recommendations, if they don't like them, they don't have to follow them, obviously, right?
What was the answer to Lois's question?
I just asked if WARF fell under 7.
I know.
I was
What's the answer to that?
My answer was I was going to make it 10A.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if you have an advisory group in any, with any expertise in something related to the city's business, and something comes up that we can't predict right now, and it's a special project, and they want to do it, they ask us to do it. I don't have any strong feeling about, I'd leave it, yeah. Stay in, yeah. Now, propose recommend additional financial areas of study. I don't think we have the horsepower to do that right now, and they could wrap that under number 7, I think. I would delete 8.
Well, shouldn't it be our prerogative to go ahead and make recommendations of areas to study that the city council may not be aware of? They don't have to tell us. We could tell them.
That's part of this work plan policy that once a year, we decide what we want to do, and Barbara presents it to the city council, and they go yay, nay. Am I correct, Barbara?
Well, we haven't done that for a while. And it was a little bit reversed under previous management. In other words, they gave us the work plan and we commented on it and asked questions and clarifications. So again, that's going to go back to what's in the policy that what we're supposed to do, I guess, or what the ad hoc committee recommends.
And some of these things, which I'll come to when we're through with this, but some of the items come up in the middle of the year, like this half-cent sales tax and the organization that was formed to manage the money. Those are things that would not have been known, and this allows that to at least come into discussion.
Any thoughts on number 8? Delete it, leave it in there, it's okay. I mean, I don't have any strong feelings. Okay. Yeah, okay. Let's see, 9, all recommendations to be provided to the City Council in writing unless otherwise requested on no less than a semi-annual basis. We also have not been doing this. Now, some of it's been done through the staff taking notes and also reporting back, as well as our liaison person to City Council. So maybe I should say we haven't been doing this, this group hasn't been doing it on a formal basis, but I think the end result is it's been getting done indirectly.
Barbara, you did one memo to the City Council, which it is awkward when we agree to something. Someone needs to take the minutes and get them written down then. And
I have a suggestion on that, because this is one thing I think we should be doing more of.
Yes.
My recommendation would be, or just a suggestion, is at the beginning of the meeting, one of the 7 volunteer to take the notes, not the chair, but somebody else. And that person would take the notes home, clean them up, and send them to 2 other people to just review to be sure that they agreed with the notes. The notes would be really short and only on things that we actually voted on. If the 3 people said, okay, that makes sense, you captured the point, then the note taker would forward those to Ms. Galloway, which would include them in a City Council packet on anything that we think that, if we vote on something, it's something that I think that the City Council needs to have formal knowledge of. It's coming from us, not from indirectly through the thing. That's just a suggestion.
No, it's a good suggestion, and it takes a month to do that, which maybe that's the best we can do.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that, let's say you took the notes today. You'd have 2 or 3 bullet points. That would be about it. And you would send it to Lois and John. Assuming that they didn't say you were nuts, then and we're still within the Brown Act criteria, then you would go ahead and, clean them up, make them pretty, and forward them on to Ms. Galloway. Done. You do it in 24 hours.
So I have some thoughts.
But then what happens then I guess Ms. Callaway then puts it in the minutes, which we will see the next month. And
No, she puts it in the City Council's packet. These are recommendations from the Finance Committee. Is there something wrong with that idea?
There might be.
Okay.
Because of Brown Act considerations, that you don't have approved minutes and you're submitting something that hasn't been approved by the board to reflect. You're asking just a segment of this board to reflect what actually occurred. So that's something that the subcommittee will probably have to run by the city attorney. You have the semi-annual expense report to the city, transmitted by this committee, and again, that's something that's approved by the committee as a whole. So I can see that we might be running afoul of the Brown Act if that doesn't have a formalized vote prior.
Well, think of some way that we might be able to, could we go ahead at the end of the meeting? Let's say that Mr. Bowes is the note taker. He would say, I want to send to the City Council our recommendations on the investment report and the budget performance report. And we would say, okay, Bill. And then just so that there was some confidence.
Your staff can always do that. The staff can always say this is what occurred, but having something sent by only a a fraction of the committee without formalized approval could be a problem. That's all I'm saying. I don't know for sure. I'm not an attorney.
So let me take it a step higher. The reason Homer's making this suggestion, and there could be other suggestions, is we're trying to figure out a good way to communicate to City Council on items of significant importance, correct? And we don't think, I always thought that was the purpose of doing minutes. Now, if the minutes on any, I'm talking about business meeting or anything, if the minutes are taking a month to get out, and again, I'm not criticizing, and this is prioritization, if they're taking a month to get out and they are a collection of YouTube clicks and things that we think maybe our leaders just don't have time to do this for every advisory board, then I'd say, if you're not going to do the minutes right, then let's not do them. And by right, I mean really summarizing this significant thing and getting them out in 72 hours or before the next 1 week. So maybe we find another way of doing that. And another way we could conceivably do that is we have a liaison person for the council. And I think that person should be sitting right over there at that staff table, not commenting, sorry if I'm making more work, but not commenting under public comment, because that's just, you have the right to do that as a member of the public, but if you're our liaison, maybe on all these advisory boards, you have that person over there at the staff taking notes, who will also be at the next city council meeting. Talk about a direct, because my concern always is, if you don't like one part of the process that's not working, let's just go implement another thing. And I'm afraid then we're going to be accused of creating more to the bureaucracy instead of the same thing that many of us private citizens in the private sector say, let's not create a bureaucracy. So let's fix something and make it work for us. That would be my thought.
So I said I wasn't going to speak, and now I'm going to speak.
I'm sorry?
I said I wasn't going to speak on this item, and now I'm going to add my opinion in here. Take it with a grain of salt. But we have not been taking formal recommendations and votes on many of our action items. So when I report back, I say by consensus, the committee agreed with the investment report, for example. We could change the practice by that. The committee could make formal recommendations on each item. And then in the staff report, I would report what the recommendation was and what the vote was, and your council liaison who is at the meetings would be on the council to know if that was accurately reported or not. Instead of adding another round of this person can write it versus that person, if it's in the staff report, if it's a formal motion that's made with a vote taken, there's not much interpretation on staff's part. We write down what the motion was and how the vote was. Council liaison will be at council meetings to confirm that that's an accurate representation. And that might be a more simpler process. But the motions have to be quite clear. We have to be better about making our motions and making them very understandable.
Well, I guess what I was trying to get to, are you going to present the investment report at the next city council meeting?
Yes.
Okay. I would think that the city council would like to know that we looked at it.
And they do. So right now, the report is sitting in the folder for council. It says that we didn't take the third quarter report. It's being presented now, and it was heard by the committee on May 21st or whatever date it was, agreed to be forwarded to the council by consensus. There's a line in there that says the fourth quarter report was shared with today's date, agreed to be forwarded. If you don't agree to forward it, I will go back in tomorrow and change that to whatever your recommendation is. When we do mid-year report, first quarter report, there is always a line in the staff reports or a paragraph that says what date the committee heard the item and any recommendations they had. For instance, last year during budget adoption, there was questions about the sole source purchase for the fire engine and the process that would go through. The committee approved use of Measure Q funds for that, but wanted to have the sole source justification brought back to them before the purchase. When we went to budget, that was shared with the council that was the committee's recommendation on the budget. So whenever there's action taken, we summarize it. I think where we're falling short is we don't make a lot of formal recommendations and votes at this committee. We can improve upon that, and then it's not a matter of me saying by consensus. There would be a motion that somebody made and a vote taken, and I would just use those words.
Well, isn't this whole topic something that the ad hoc committee should address? And how does the boards and commissions communicate to the city council?
You're right. So you could make a recommendation that leave it up to the ad hoc committee, or you can make a recommendation on a specific process to go through, or you can make no recommendation. I mean, you really have the gamut here. I was trying to make a suggestion to simplify instead of having multiple people trying to report out on something.
That's my concern as well. Or we could make a recommendation that, hey, we've had a discussion and a couple ideas were brought up. You as leaders, executive decision makers, follow through on it,
How would you like to?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, how would you like to hear back
It's
from
their
us?
decision, not ours.
Yeah, right.
So let them figure it out.
Well, you want to decrease the amount of reading that they need to do and only report to them areas that we have recommendations. And if it's just by consensus, we all agree, there should be nothing other than what Jennifer described seems adequate from the city council standpoint that we looked at it.
Right. Denver, Boulder, Santa Cruz, we never transmitted anything. You had the minutes, and the council members had access to those minutes. If there was a specific recommendation, a hot button item, that would be included in the staff report back to the council from whatever committee it may be.
But the YouTube link is 1 hour and 45 minutes about.
Right.
So
Is that how you did it there?
Yeah.
Oh.
I've never transmitted from a committee to the council. That is what your staff is for.
Yeah. Okay.
I think this is an important generic issue, and Bill and I did discuss this, and the Brown Act came up as far as how do you get around that. There's a timing issue. One is if we had a subcommittee on some of these issues, the subcommittee could write a draft report, bring it to the next meeting. That could be reviewed. But this isn't unique to us. WRFCAC had a very robust discussion by all of the members there that had some, I thought, okay. Paul, did you make that? They had a very robust discussion with some very good points. I wondered whether or not at the end of the day, the only thing that would be officially transmitted was they agreed to go forward with the contract with Grollo. Because that was kind of the gist, but there was certainly a lot of substance there. Now, how could Paul run off and in that instance, that example, and write something up to make sure that the summary of those members were there? And similarly here, we've gotten into discussions on WRFCAC as well, and crisping those up into a motion gets a little difficult, but it's tough with the Brown Act. How do you get around it? I understand that, but if there is some way, and I would guess all the other advisory groups have the same situation, of how when something significant comes up, how do they pass on their thoughts and concerns? The council makes the decision, so it's not like they have to agree with all those thoughts and concerns, but to make sure they're passed on other than, well, at the end of the day, it was approved. When there's so much more substance behind that discussion.
But Bart, isn't that why they have a council liaison? Maybe I've been fortunate enough where there's always one at both of the committees I've served on. But if that person is sitting there, and they always look to me like they're paying attention when I look at them, so aren't they?
If that's what happens, I don't know what.
I thought all the boards had it.
If what you're saying is, WRFCAC recent discussion to me is an easy one, because there was a lot of discussion by I think all 4 members, whoever was there.
That's right, 4 members.
Each of them had some great comments. So if the liaison was there and took notes and then reflected that back in summary form, I'm good with it. I don't, if that's
Or
if that's
the
what,
liaison was not there and watched the...
Either way, that they got that.
That's their
and so
job.
that summary comments would be passed along. Now, granted, it'd be through their filter, but that's okay. They're still a
That's
city
their
council
job.
member.
Yeah, right.
That would be okay, as long as it's not just, it was approved, with the Corollo contract. So if the essence was it was approved, then I would not think that system's working. If the essence was, and Paul certainly had a lot of the comments, if the essence of sort of his concerns, that I think were valid concerns that how to help keep the cost down, that those were reflected back to the council, that would work for me.
Okay. And we've had this discussion before, and that's fair. And I don't mean to say, I guess if you want to eliminate these notes, you could, but I think it is a nice reference document, certainly. I've gone back like Measure Q a year later, and what did we discuss last year? Did we miss anything, you know, the Coral Street property, or is anything falling through the crack? So I agree, it's a good reference document. I just don't think it's practical, and I think that was Homer's point for everybody to go back and do the 2-hour YouTube, session to figure out what's going on. Those of you that have served on other boards and corporations or companies, and you've had minutes, do you have any specific thoughts? Lois?
Yeah,
Don't have to worry about the Brown Act. Makes a big difference.
Makes a big difference, yeah, when you can't even respond to a quorum check with that.
I've been on several public boards, and invariably I'm dissatisfied with what the secretary
Oh, so it's not just us
prepares
that you're-
minutes. And part of it is, if you're in the
Yeah.
technical world, the translation of the things you're talking about oftentimes are not covered. And so I usually became the minute taker, and that worked all the time. Usually there was boards back east, and I'd fly back, and I always wrote the minutes, and then the next board meeting, the minutes were approved. Of course, I sent out a copy. Of course, invariably, no one ever looks at them because everyone's too busy, but they look at them at the next meeting, and we could do something like that if we wanted to. But I really like Scott's, Mr. Collins's recommendation, because clearly the city council members do read the staff report. And so when we make recommendations or motions and approve them, if the staff will include those in the staff report, and that would be great. It would be very helpful also. I think if that's going to be the policy, I'd be inclined to want to go see the staff report before the city council meeting, make sure, well, I guess we do because it's published with the minutes.
It's published, yeah.
And if there's something missing, I mean, as we saw this time, they can get modified when you call in a change. So if that becomes the procedure, I think that is a good way to go.
I think if we take, Mr. Beckman, your example of WRF-CAC, again, if we go back to making sure we're making clear motions, and it is the CFAC committee approves X, Y, and Z, but in the motion do special note or emphasis on the following points to be considered. So noting that you may approve the contract with Corolla or whomever it was with WRF-CAC, and there were good points that should be shared with the council, you can, kind of bullet point those for it to be included as part of the motion, consensus or voted on and agreed to, and then passed on to the committee that way. And again, the liaison would be there to verify that or make corrections if it was misstated.
John, did you have any thoughts? That's why I'm asking you.
I agree with Jennifer's recommendation. I think that things should be done with the formal motion, second, and vote. Every recommendation from this committee should follow that same procedure. I am of the opinion when it comes to minutes that less is better. Only the official actions or recommendations should be shown in the minutes. I don't think that, if somebody's interested in what a particular member said or what their argument consisted of or whatever, they can watch the YouTube video. But all of those types of things, certain member had this position or that member had this position, those kind of things should never be in the minutes because those are not official actions. So when it comes to minutes, less is better. And I think your recommendation about just having the vote and then including that information in the staff report, that is the most direct way of getting the recommendation to the city council. And this committee is advisory to the council. I mean, we're not advisory to the staff. I understand that sometimes what we do, and we make recommendations that may be helpful in the work that you're doing, but really, officially, we are advisory to the city council, and that's the relationship. So I like Jennifer's idea the best.
Let me open up for public comment in case there's anybody burning to make a comment. We would welcome your input.
We're not finished yet.
Oh, okay. Well,
Number 10?
okay. I see. I'm sorry. This got delayed on. My apologies, sir. We will open up to public comment. I just want to make sure we don't forget their input.
Number
Okay.
10?
Go ahead. Number 10.
Submit an
Let's see.
annual work plan. Is that something we're doing, or is that new? Is that happening?
It's not happening. It's not something we're doing. We're doing it more on an ad hoc basis, so.
Yeah, the city council has adopted a sort of a generic 2-year work plan. The process prior city manager was to then go back to the advisory committees and hash it out, and then bring it back to council, and then have a joint council advisory committee meeting, and that took 6 months to get to that place. So this might be an area by which you might have suggestions for the ad hoc committee about how to best align the city's overall work plan with your work plan. And that's a big nut to crack, obviously, because it could open up all kinds of things, but having alignment obviously makes sense for all the committees in council.
I thought this is something we do every year. We say, okay, what do we do this next year? I mean, I don't know if this is the words or not, but that's what we've done to say what are the major issues we're going to focus on.
So we want to keep it.
Well, let's see what everybody else has to say. Or we want to make a recommendation to the ad
That's what
hoc.
I mean.
Yeah, right, yeah. Want to keep it.
Have we ever done it before? I mean, it has been done, but for some reason it was stopped. Is it a needless activity?
It was probably stopped more on this necessity and in terms of staff time and meetings and scheduling and televising and Brown Act and with all the other, whatever, 8, I don't know how many, 7 or 8 advisory boards we have. And the last few times, I thought it was more driven from the council as to what they want us to do, not, driven down, not driven up. So what do we think? Do we think we should continue to do this? Should we request council meet with us? Should it be every two years, every 1 year? Or do we just drop it? And I think we need some clear direction on what it is we're working on from the council.
Yeah, but isn't the role defined in what our responsibilities are? We review the budget, we measure Q, we look at
Well,
financials.
we have outlined today what we think we should do in general every year.
Right.
My feeling is if the city council wants us to do something else or not as much, hey, that's their choice. They'll tell us. And all we would suggest is the city council be very specific about what they want us to do. And we'll do it, right?
Which means it would be under item 7, the special financial projects or anything else that's not encompassed in the first.
So I'd go along with Homer, we'd just delete 10. There's no sense making more work.
Okay. And again, the ad hoc will hear, what we've discussed. And
10A,
go ahead, Homer. Homer has a suggestion to add something.
No, I'm just suggesting that according to our agenda, the item we're discussing includes budgeting and the WRF. And we haven't discussed the WRF and what our role is in the WRF process. And I'm guessing that's got something to do with our audience today.
Okay, so do we want to have some
That
discussion
certainly needs
first,
to
and then
be, since it was approved by the city council, that the CFAC should be looking at financials. That needs to be written, whether we're prepared to write what that verbiage is right now. I guess we can simplify it and just say we would look at the financials of the WRF.
But just some items, I know the preamble to this was we can't do everything, but just to point out some things that we're not doing, whether or not we do them or not, but just to point out for the general population, because I get stopped and say, why aren't you doing this? They're assuming if it's got a dollar sign associated with it, that our group must be looking at it. So the 1/2 cent sales tax, we were not brought into that at all. So on record, anybody watching, we were not asked to participate in that discussion. The Bartle Well study, which I brought up earlier, I have concerns on both sides of it as far as what's the assumptions being made. I have been looking back over the assumptions that were made in the last study. I have some concerns. The other part that I've got concerns about is a major part of that study is a cash flow, and looking at the performance of Carollo on their cash flow curve that they had, and the revised one is going to be what this study will be based on, I think some more eyeballs looking at that would probably be well advised, because it's going to be based on when do we think things are going to happen, and Crow did not do very well on their first attempt. In fact, they did terribly. The other issue that we were not involved with, which could definitely be fine, but there was an organization formed to manage the loan funds. I don't know, that probably was fine, but I know nothing about it. But once again, there's dollar signs associated with it, and I think city members very likely could have thought we were somehow engaged in that discussion of why that was set up and what our involvement was. And again, our involvement was not at all. Whether it should or shouldn't have been, it's another issue, but we were not involved in any of these three issues. And then when it gets into WRFCAC itself, we agreed to go to quarterly, which I think was a good move, but there's a lot of discussion there. For example, the schedule that we had talked about before, the schedule that I was given said that groundbreaking was supposed to start on September 2nd. I went by there the other day, it hasn't happened, so we're behind in the schedule, and we've talked about reviewing the Carollo estimate with the city budget. We don't have that either. So there's several things that we're not involved with or we don't have answers to.
Can I address that?
Yeah, please, point well taken, go ahead.
Yeah, so the city hasn't said anything about a half-cent sales tax. The city said it's collecting input from the community, and that will include this CFAC. It's very important that you have input in that process through the opinion research that we're conducting. Opinion noted about Carollo's performance. I think there's a lot more involved than simply saying something like that. And beyond that, we are looking into the question that Mr. Beckman raised about the 123 versus 126. We're also trying to get everything done in time to begin construction. So it's a little bit less of a priority because we've been saying all along it's a $126 million project. So we are actually investigating those things, and we'll be bringing those back to this committee.
And some of those will come back to this committee. I think, Bart, I understand, we've had this discussion maybe even before you were on the committee about everything with a dollar sign doesn't come, everything the city does is going to have a dollar sign associated. So obviously we're going to have to prioritize and maybe some things that we think should come to us, whether they were controversial or school resource officer or whatever, they may not come to us because we, serve at whatever the council wants us to address. So we have to kind of understand that. And I think we're going to have to prioritize some things. And I think sometimes we're in a little bit of difficulty here because we don't have clear direction of what we should be doing. We can't do everything. If we want to do everything, then we need to apply to the city and work in the finance department and do everything. That's my perspective.
Right. That wasn't my point. Was just to make sure it's clear that we are limited relative to what we're doing.
Right.
And I realize and I agree with. We pay staff to do a lot of these things, and just so it's clear that we do what we're asked to do. So.
At the last,
go ahead.
No. Yeah, I'm going to. At the last meeting, we tried to have this subject, and then Homer said, rather than talk just about the WRF, make it broader. So in preparation for today's meeting, knowing it works best to have something written down, I wrote some motions. And the first one is, after each review of the city budget, Measure Q spending, and WRF financial reports, the CFAC will provide, I'm going to take Mr. Collins' recommendations, the city manager with a memorandum summarizing our findings and advising the city manager of any areas of concern. And the city manager will put that in the staff report and would get to the city council pretty quickly. And I would move that we approve something like that. Open to any discussion on that, because this is a very broad topic. I mean, it kind of is overarching of these 10 or 11 items, whatever. Maybe we're down to 8 now. But anytime we look at city budget, and that includes the capital budget. It becomes the spending budget and actuals and the 10-year forecast, et cetera, or Measure Q spending, or various WRF financial reports. We're going to have some conclusions and recommendations, and we should then write those down and provide those to the city manager, who'll put it in the staff report.
You know, I thought we just discussed Jen's suggestion that, and the advisory person would be here and would include that versus going back and us doing a separate document on everything we talk about.
But what we're saying is we're going to agree to something, and as Jen said, then we'll take a motion to approve it.
Yeah, what's going to happen is that, let's go back to the investment report. We would have actually made an motion. Do you guys approve the investment report? And we would have voted on it. And then that goes into her staff report. Same thing with the budget performance report. Did you review it? Yes. And we voted on it. It goes in the thing. So that we'll have specific recommendations on each item at each meeting. Am I correct in understanding that? Correct?
They're worried about getting hit on the head by a, be careful.
That's what I understood. That was what I was trying to communicate, and that's what I understood seemed to be the agreement by the.
Well, that's essentially the same thing that
Yeah, without the memorandum part on your part. Because you're going to make this
you'll
committee.
Make the motion.
Is going to make a motion.
Someone has to make a motion and has to write it down. And
that's what we do.
You're
So
gonna do
Tracy's
that.
writing down.
And then that's going to go in the staff report.
Correct, with the vote.
We just have to, we amend the motions frequently, or we, as a result of discussions, so we have to be very clear verbatim before the motion goes to a vote, which you should do in any motion setting environment. What exactly is the motion everybody's voting on? They can always go back and pick it up from the.
Probably makes sense that staff repeat the motion before it's voted on, so we know we have it exactly as you've intended it.
Yeah. That's basically what you're saying. We're just not going to write it all down a couple more times.
I guess the only thing you want to make sure of, that you get the right verbiage written down.
Well,
Some
you
things
should-
aren't just,
yeah.
yes, you approve it, because you may want to modify it or say some other words that require a little bit of thought.
But I've seen the city clerk ask, will you please, at council meetings, will you please repeat the motion before you take the vote, so you know what you're voting on? So, yeah, that's fine.
Can we talk a little about the WRF? I had the opportunity to go through the WRFCAC meeting just a little over a week ago, and became to review Amendment 2. And some of you probably saw communication from me saying Amendment 2 should have been reviewed by the CFAC, and the acting chair ended up also, the WRFCAC said, yep, CFAC should take a look at it, but that hasn't been our responsibility. But it becomes apparent that an amendment to a contract or a new contract for some amount of work that's to be done, and all the construction work other than the actual WRF itself, have yet to be let. This requires analysis probably by WRFCAC, one would think, and also by CFAC. And it would be very helpful if WRFCAC and CFAC would have a joint meeting just to make sure we're in sync with who does what and how we work together. And that's something that has been done in the past, I understand, and it'd be worth some discussion. Does that make sense to have the WRFCAC and the CFAC get together, be a larger group, and then decide where are the areas that we can work together? Certainly when you look at, certainly the reason CFAC was given the responsibilities is more or less clearly outlined for us when she visited us back last February, was so we could alert the city council anytime we see things that are going awry, if we have concerns. We look at financial reports, that's expenditures, costs to date. Obviously, what the remaining costs are is the way you then predict what the final cost will be. Right now, fortunately, and as most program managers do, they're always will show they're staying under budget or within budget. And the first step, like Amendment 2, I thought was a very useful document that Carola put together, And it included, their attachment 3 had their cost expenditure plan for each of the remaining years, 18, 19, 19, 20, 20, 21, and 21, 22, broken down by the category of skill for each area with how many hours they're going to be putting on it. That's very useful information for anyone to analyze and say, is that right? Are they pessimistic or optimistic in what their assessment is? They're really going to spend more than that. You see how much they're spending now. They have a not to exceed, added another 2.45 million, not to exceed for phase 2 of the program, which should end, now they're saying phase 2 would end 30 June 2020, but it'll continue beyond that, of course. And so there's some financial aspects to that. Terms and conditions are not to exceed prices, which obviously have absolutely no bearing at all because phase 2 continues well beyond that. And the money is well in excess of the spend rate they've had so far, which is good. I was very concerned when I first saw their ad. They had a not to exceed of $2 million to the end of this year, and they added another $2.45 million to the end of June of 2020. I thought, wow. The total ends up being $3.95 million between now and the end of June of 2020. Eric told me, no, that money will be spent beyond that. So the not to exceed has no value at all, it seems to me. But that's a contractual issue. Again, pointing out for the CFAC should be looking at that contract is an excellent contract to be able to make an assessment. Is Corolla really only going to spend $7.3 million, the total cost, which when you add up all their pieces? The staff report said $7.64 million, so I don't know where the disparity is, but I haven't done enough analysis or looking at it to say, does that make sense? That's something that certainly I would imagine the WRFCAC would look at and say those probably are the right amount of man hours, or say you don't need that much construction management. You can do it a lot cheaper than $1 million a year for construction management. But so I propose that we have a joint CFAC WRFCAC meeting to go reconcile and put in sync what our responsibilities are, and out of that meeting we could make recommendations to these are the things that the City Council should be expecting from the CFAC and should be expecting from the WRFCAC. Any comments?
I agree that I think we should meet on some basis.
Any other thoughts here? I'll give you my thoughts. I think.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
No, I was going to say, I think that's really the ad hoc committee that should take that input and consider it in terms of how much strain that will be on the staff in preparing for the meetings. I think part of that, Bill, is we don't really understand in detail what our role is looking at quarterly WRF reports going forward prospectively versus contracts. We have a professional program manager, and I thought that contract was bid out, and who has been reporting to council and on the city's website. And I'm a little concerned with how we balance how much public input in terms of citizens that haven't been involved with this for several years in the detail level, how much involvement they have, and whether that will add to the benefit of the contract, or are we just going to have some generalists continually asking questions and looking over the shoulders of Kroll engineers and all the other companies that are going to be involved in this. So, but I think that's a decision for our leaders.
Well, I wouldn't think the ad hoc committee would be the group to figure out whether we should be working together. You need at least a subset of us and a subset of the WRFCAC to get together. Maybe that's the best idea, to get a couple of people from CFAC, a couple of people from WRFCAC to get together and then come back with a recommendation to both groups, and we go forward that way.
That's a suggestion. Homer?
Yeah. I took the time to look at the motion that was passed on January 8th regarding the transfer of the finance responsibilities. And unfortunately, the motion is not, it's very vague. Councilmember Davis moved staff recommendations to revise the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee roles and responsibilities to include the review of the financial aspects of the water reclamation facility program, relieve the Water Reclamation Facilities Advisory Committee of the responsibility while maintaining WRFCAC role for reviewing and providing the opportunity for community input on technical components of the WRF. The motion was seconded by Councilman McPherson for discussion, and it passed 4-1. My feeling is, after sitting here for the last 6 months, is that Bart's been asking for stuff for a year and a half and hasn't seen it yet. You've asked for stuff. The City Council has authorized the payment of about $1 million a year for a project manager who they have a lot of faith in. The ultimate project manager is the city manager, and he's stated numerous times that this is his deal. So if it gets screwed up, he's the one that's going to get fired, I assume, by the city council. I don't think we're ever going to get the information we need to do the analysis that you and Bart and some others want to do. And then we're going to deal with that kind of very high-level quarterly report that, without really being able to get down into below the gross numbers that they present in that report, it's going to be difficult for me to say, yeah, that makes sense. So my recommendation, quite frankly, is just to pass this thing back to the WRFCAC committee and get out of it completely, since we're only going to be in it just a little bit. I realize that's a radical concept, but I think we're just going to be spinning our wheels for the next 3 years. Frustrated.
Well, I strongly disagree. I don't think you want to just turn it over to Corolla and pay them time and materials no matter how much they want to spend. And when there's so much talent in this city and so many people pointing out areas that haven't been yet, action has not been taken yet on certain permits that are necessary and getting certain permits approved that are going to slow things down. And you want to take advantage of the knowledge that we end up having. Certainly, one of the areas that CFAC is not looking at, we're looking only at quarterly reports. And it requires more than a discussion at this level with Brown Act activities.
Well,
you need to look into some detail, and there needs to be some opportunity then to write questions, which you can do. And Jennifer does an excellent job in answering those questions when we submit the questions prior to the meeting.
I was just suggesting it goes back to the WRFCAC committee. It's still going to be, all the financial stuff's still going to be reviewed, but it's going to be reviewed by people that are engineers and supposedly have some relationships and understanding of the costs.
But I think when they end up giving
and they'll have all the information, and we don't.
But they don't have any people that are familiar with contractual terms and conditions. And that's the expertise that this group has, and I'm sure that's part of the rationale that the council used when they said they should stand up a separate CFAC. All I am recommending is the CFAC and the WRFCAC work together to decide who's going to do what and how do we do things together. The other thing we probably need to do in this roles and group, the ad hoc group that's being performed, hopefully they'll come talk to some of us. We'll come up with a recommendation that when a contract is to be let for doing all the conveyance facilities. Is that going to be one contract, multiple contracts? You know, obviously they have the Waterworks Engineering Company are doing the design, but who's going to do the contracting? And then what kind of contracts are going to be let? Are they going to be one contract for the whole thing, or can be broken into pieces? Just an example. Or you get something like we just received in Amendment 2. I mean, that should have been reviewed by some expertise. I talked to Eric after the meeting, and it now didn't get presented to City Council this last time. I'm not sure what the reason is. He was going to provide some additional backup to make it more understandable, because it is a bit confusing. And there's some things in there probably could get cleaned up. I don't think the city, at this point in time, I don't think they really even need an Amendment 2 right now, because Amendment 1 is $2 million not to exceed through 31 December. And all the over and aboves can be handled with city manager approval. But you would like to have not to exceed prices that really have some teeth in it, that they're going to only spend so many hours to get phase 2 done or phase 3. And obviously I can understand the problems that Corolla has in the way the program was structured. But there certainly is a need for people with expertise in contracts and program management to be taking a look at it. The WRFCAC doesn't have that expertise. The WRFCAC ended up meeting, I think they have a meeting in May was a meeting, and then they had a meeting last week. And the meeting, they had one in June, I guess.
Yeah, but
and then they met again here in September.
If their responsibility, for a couple things, if their responsibility was to review these quarterly reports, they would have to go from an ad hoc committee to a formal committee and meet at least every quarter. And number one. Number two, there's no reason in the world, I think that committee's light a couple people from its original charter. Mr. Collins, do you recall off the top of your head? Aren't there a couple open positions?
On WRFCAC?
Yeah.
At least one, yeah.
There's at least one?
Just one.
Yeah.
Just one? That position could be filled with somebody with, contract financial experience. Barbara's already on the committee, so there'd be two people that, have a financial background. So it's not exactly like this. I'm suggesting we just let Eric Caceres take off on his own. It's still going to get citizens review, but it's going to get reviewed in more depth with engineers, and we're not going to ever get the kind of detailed information that I think that you want and that Bart wants to make informed decisions. That's my opinion.
Well, I strongly disagree. Anything that I have asked for is being provided. We asked for a better schedule, and Eric's going to be providing that. We ended up asking for more definition on the contractor expenses, how much Corolla is spending, how much the city is spending, and I trust that the next quarterly report is going to have that information in it. We're just looking to see, what, based upon the quarterly reports, you should get some sense of, if it does include the forecast with the milestone chart, which they haven't yet provided, but that certainly should come to us. We can make a good assessment of where they're going, and then you can track progress against milestones.
Please don't speak to my frustration level. Yes, there is some. Do I think I still have the ability to provide a lot of valuable input based on 40 years of primarily project control experience? Yes, I think I can. So if you're frustrated, Homer, then maybe you need to do something. I'm not there. I still think that we can provide a lot. We have a lot of expertise. Mine happens to be in project controls. I think Lois was in project management or contracts, and Bill was in contract management. I think others here have that same experience. And I think we have an obligation to provide feedback through the staff and to the city council to help them manage this project, to come in under budget, be whatever the $126 million. So we need to make sure the city budget is $126 million. We need to provide input to point out where that may be in jeopardy. And so I am not at that frustration level that you're speaking to. So I strongly suggest that we continue to look at this on a quarterly basis in the most effective way possible.
Anybody else have any comments? Let me open it up to public comment, please, on this or any of the items we've been discussing. If anybody would like to make a comment, please come forward. Optionally state your name. Thank you for attending.
Hi, I'm Kathy Quigley. I'm a resident here in Morro Bay. I wanted to just address the minutes issue again, just be sure that the group considers whether the public can easily find the actions that are taken by the advisory board. And in hearing you talk tonight, my question would be, does tonight's suggestion eliminate putting those minutes on the city website? I tend to use the city website. I go to your agenda, and then I look at your minutes. Would it eliminate that? And if so, and not if so, but if that's the case, it kind of sounds like the actions would go directly from your approval here your motion into a staff report. And I don't see where that would be available to the public in a timely basis and an easy way to find it.
Thank you, Kathy.
So,
Any comment?
yeah, I'm going to suggest at the end of this that we start our practice of making recommendations and summarize what you want to send to the ad hoc committee. So I hope somebody's taking good notes on all these discussions. But the recommendation on the communication to the council, my understanding of what the discussion has been so far, the minutes as they exist today will still exist going forward in the same manner. The communication to the council, because, for example, the investment report is on the meeting for Tuesday, you would make a recommendation, you would make a motion, there would be a vote on that motion, staff will repeat it to make sure we have it correct, and then use that language in our staff report to communicate to council. That's in advance of our minutes being made available to the public for this meeting due to the timing, but both would be, minutes would exist as they exist today, and the recommendation would be reiterated in the staff report for the council.
And that staff report is included in the council agenda.
Right. Correct.
Is there any other public comment, please? Okay, close public comment. Thank you for that, Jennifer. Any other discussions, thoughts? John?
Well, if you would, Scott, could you just give a real thumbnail sketch of how you envision communication and lines of authority should be between the project manager, you, the ad hoc committee, the city council, and this committee?
I can tell you how it's working now. Rob and I work with Eric virtually every day. Rob a little bit closer because of the technical components. But, Eric and I communicate almost daily on kind of the broader issues that we're addressing, from the permitting side to threats of litigation to issues with property owners who maybe aren't letting us on their property, and figuring out the WIFIA loan. I mean, there's probably 20 or 30 things we check in on a regular basis. And I try to prioritize that amongst the other 26 action items that we're working with council on for the next 2 years. Over anything else. And then as far as it relates to this group, City Council has sort of broadly defined your role, but in subsequent meetings has really narrowed it in terms of how they interpret that to be review the quarterly reports, which provide a significant amount of data. I understand what Homer's saying. I don't know if we'll ever satisfy his curiosities entirely, because he's exceptionally talented and bright and wants to dig into the details. I don't know if we could ever provide that sufficiently to meet everybody's level, but I think we can meet kind of the median level of expectation about the level of detail for this group to really get into what's going on. I think we've had a lot of good interactions individually with members up here and then collectively with the group, with members of WRFCAC, with community members, about how to make that document more visible and more useful. And each user group has a different interpretation, again, of what that means. Some people just want to see a dashboard and that's all I need. And then other people want to see split outs on program management because that's their concern or fixation. Others want to see the schedule and want to see 50 line items, and others only want to see 10. And so creating a report that satisfies all those different perspectives is impossible, but I think it's been a work in progress. And as Mr. Bowes mentioned, we're making further refinement to those based on input we've received from this committee, either collectively or individually. So I think we're trying to be responsive, make it useful for you. You've served a very important role. As far as a citizen review with experts on the financial side and WRFCAC on the other side as far as the technical. And there could be room, I think, and what I'm hearing from Mr. Bowes is how do you make those work together, and potentially when it comes down to the actual contracts for the conveyance system and injection well, potentially there could be room for a joint meeting so that you don't have 3 weeks lapse in time between when WRFCAC is typically scheduled and when this group is scheduled. and thus could delay the project. I don't think anybody wants that to happen. We understand the constraints we're under. So that could be maybe a recommendation to make to the council ad hoc committee that oversees this. Maybe just in those instances only where those two groups could blend their expertise on the most important remaining fiscal components of the project, as far as my view of it. So I think this committee's been very helpful. You may not feel that way entirely, but believe me, it's been very helpful for me. It's been very helpful for Eric and Rob in managing the project. We do everything we can to make sure we're going to bring this in on time and on budget. Whether that means sleeping 4 hours a night on average, that's what it takes. That's what we're going to do. We don't have control over everything. We're not going to make excuses, but those are some of the issues we're addressing. And I think we've been pretty transparent about those issues as much as we can without getting into legal territory for this committee, for council, and for community members.
Now, there also is an ad hoc committee of 2 council members, is there not?
Yes, sir.
And what is their role?
Their role is to help look into some of the bigger issues, kind of 30,000-foot level. That's been their role for at least the 2 years that I've been here, to help understand what community members may be feeling or interpreting, and then how to bring things forward that will be most effective for council and then for the community. So they provide some advisory role to me. But it's pretty limited. Maybe once a month we meet with that group. Because as Homer said, I mean that the overall charge is with the city manager. Corollo is an extension of me in essence, like another department head. But that advisory committee or the subcommittee has been very helpful in limited capacity, just kind of providing a 30,000-foot level review before council.
One thing that might be helpful is for us to appoint a subcommittee of the CFAC just to work with the WRFCAC. And the other thing I'd like to see is the WRFCAC meet more frequently than they have met in the past. There's so many things that are ongoing right now, very critical timing, and I think all the help that the city manager and Eric could get advice for how to overcome some of these obstacles that are invariably going to get thrown up. That's just what happens in government organizations when projects get going. So is that something that we would entertain, having a subcommittee? The obvious subcommittee is Bart and myself who have been spending a lot of time together working with WARF and working with Eric. And so that we did talk about having a subcommittee at one point, but the panel decided, no, we all wanted to get involved. Now Homer's saying, I don't want any involvement, So clearly certainly it's what our backgrounds are. I've been in background for almost 30 years in the building and constructing and testing of major programs in the billions of dollars and some in the tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. So I've been at every level of building things and constructing things that have technical risk, have schedule risk, and so I understand those kind of problems. And so I have an interest, and Bart has a somewhat similar background as well. And so I think I'd propose that we at least talk about, does that make sense for us to work with? We have Paul Donnelly sitting back there and work with Paul and WRFCAC. I don't know when the next WRFCAC meeting is, Madam Chairman. Maybe you know.
Ad hoc basis, on demand.
Yeah,
as requested.
I cannot imagine there's not a need to have a WRFCAC meeting every month. There's so many things when I talk to anyone about it who knows much about it. And they're looking for help on getting some of these things sorted out. Yeah. Any discussion on it? Am I the only one that believes we should have a subcommittee to go then work with WRFCAC and help synchronize our roles and responsibilities and bring that recommendation back to this committee?
I agree, and just minor clarification, I have not been meeting with Eric. I have talked with Bill.
I want to hear what the ad hoc city council meeting decides on the direction of the advisory committees, the frequency of meetings, the clarification of some rules, how we're going to do our work plan, what we're going to do. There's a lot of dollar sign related issues that the city is doing. Maybe they feel we're focusing too much on this and ought to be looking at some of the budget long-term challenges. I don't know. That's what we want to hear from them. This isn't the only thing on the plate that has to get addressed. It's from a financial perspective.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of circle back to how we started this conversation. This committee was originally formed as a Measure Q oversight committee. It has morphed into a variety of other things since then at the direction of the council. We want to make sure as staff that you are clear on what those rules are as they currently exist. If you're not clear what you need to be clear on them or what you're not clear on, we want to make sure that you are satisfied with the information that you're getting to meet those roles and make decisions and recommendations for what those roles are. To the extent you're not, what you need to do that or what you feel you need to do that. All of those in a form of a motion and a recommendation for the ad hoc committee to consider, and keeping in mind that, the wharf is the largest project the city is probably ever going to undertake, so I'm not trying to minimize that by any stretch, but we're building a $126 million project, and we didn't add finance staff to help oversee that. So this is all in addition to the regular legal requirements and accounting that we have to do on a day-to-day basis. So when we talk about staff's capacity to respond to that, it would be helpful to have a priority order of what your needs are that the ad hoc committee and even staff can use as a working point to go off those recommendations and suggestions, because we just can't do everything without having more capacity on board. And like I said, I'm not trying to minimize that, but it's just the reality. There's 6 of us in the finance department. So I'd rather you pick what you feel your roles are, prioritize those so we can do a good job of meeting your expectations with those, and focus on those items, and that would be a recommendation for the ad hoc committee. Knowing that we have about 40 minutes left in the meeting today before Planning Commission at 6, we probably should start to narrow that conversation down into some kind of motion, what your priorities are and what information you need to meet those priorities, or clarity that you need from the ad hoc committee, and if you have recommendations on that.
Well, let me start it off and be simple and do it. The first motion would be out of the bylaws, as Homer introduced, that is someone taking notes on this and we read it back? I'll make it as simple as I can, that we delete items on page 39 of our bylaws, delete items number 2, number 4, and number 10. Is there a second?
Can I amend the motion?
Pardon me?
Can I amend your motion?
Okay. Sure.
Item number 3, delete the words existing budget and replace 10-year forecast. Item number 5, add the word after review, mid-year, and annual budget prior to presentation.
Wait, say that again.
In other words, in number 5, I would word this
annual and
review, mid-year, and annual budget prior to presentation.
Okay.
So I've got 7.
4 was deleted.
4 was deleted.
Okay.
2 was deleted. 4 was deleted. 8 was deleted, and 10.
We agreed.
We still have number 11, don't we?
Yeah, no, we have to have number 11. Yeah.
And didn't you add a 10A?
No, because what did we discuss? What did we decide?
Where is
Deleted.
Wharf in this?
Okay,
We haven't written one for Wharf. I was doing a simple one to get.
So
Is that a 7 special project?
no,
the wharf was going to fall under 7, was the discussion, but
Yeah.
the motion right now, and we need a second for it. So the motion is before you can have discussion. The motion is to delete items 2, 4, and 8 and 10. Clarify for number 3, strike existing budget, replace financial forecast. Add to number 5, review annual and mid-year budget prior to presentation. So that's the motion.
I believe he said 10-year forecast.
You said 10-year.
10-year
Okay.
10-year forecast.
Yeah.
So you need a second, and then you can have discussion.
I'll second.
Okay, now, any discussion on that motion that Ms. Callaway was kind enough to clarify for us, taking the notes?
Yeah, I still think 7 has merit personally.
Seven's still in, isn't it?
7's still part of the,
Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
okay.
Did we put, I hate to amend it again, did we put wharf and special projects such as the wharf in there, or just?
It's in there as 7.
It's in 7,
it's not called out specifically, but it would fall under category 7.
so we don't need to spell that out. Okay, good.
All right, so we all clear on the motion
I have a question.
that John has seconded? We're clear on that? Okay,
Okay.
you're clear on that, correct? Okay, go ahead. Before we vote, I'm going to have you read it back. I know. No, we have discussion before.
You said priority. I don't think that we prioritize this stuff.
I don't think this is where the priority comes in.
No.
It comes into play when we get into the detail of the wharf. What do you need? Is that prioritized over quarterly budget performances, for example?
Right, the whole enchilada.
Right.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second to that motion, we're doing discussion on that motion. If there's any further discussion, nope, okay, can you very clearly read that motion back to make sure we all have it, and then we'll vote on it, if that's okay?
Okay, the motion made by Committee Member Bose, seconded by Committee Member Martin, was with respect to page 39 of the Advisory Board Handbook, Purpose and Authority. The Citizens Finance Advisory Committee shall perform the following duties. Numbers 2, 4, 8, and 10 are stricken. Number 3 is revised to read, review 10-year forecast document to determine long-term financial sustainability and make recommendations as appropriate. Number 5 is revised to say, review annual and mid-year budget prior to presentation to the City Council and make recommendations as appropriate.
Very clear, thank you. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay, so that recommendation to the ad hoc committee regarding our purpose and authority and specific duties is approved 6-0. Okay, so next, we have to talk about some of our other priorities, or what we think we should be doing.
Could I introduce another motion? The next time we meet, we'll get the first quarter financial report from Corolla on the WRF. And so just in preparation for that, I'd like to move that upon receipt of each WRF quarterly report, the CFAC will include any recommendations for improvements to the report in the future. I'm anticipating they may not be the right kind of a schedule, or they may not be the right summaries. I think there's lots of ways to reduce the size of the report, and as Mr. Collins talked about, they're trying to improve it. But so it's not clearly in our scope to do that, and I want to make sure we're not violating the Brown Act by making recommendations to make changes to the report in the future. Any discussion, please?
So if that's a motion, you'd need a second before you can have discussion.
Oh.
So what's the motion?
The motion is, upon receipt of each WRF quarterly report, the CFAC will include in our recommendations any improvements for the report in the future.
Based on our new procedure, wouldn't that be included in the motion that we're going to be voting on the quarterly report?
So you need to have a second before discussion. You need to have a second to the motion before discussion.
Okay, I'll second it so we can have some discussion.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid getting into a Brown Act saying, well, you're not allowed to talk about, that's not a financial discussion.
Oh, it's not, well, is this on our agenda?
Well, it's under new business.
I mean, does it say, and water reclamation
Yeah.
facility financing? Are we okay talking about this?
This is a very broad topic intended to be that way so you can you can have a discussion and make recommendations on what you feel you need to complete your role. I would suggest maybe you're a little ahead of yourself, and the recommendation should first be, does this committee want to continue to review WARF financial?
Oh.
I mean, there seemed to be a little bit of a yes or no going on there, but maybe
Yeah, at a
that's where
higher
you
level.
need to start, and then whittle that down to what do you need to do that, or do you need clarity as to what that means? And I think that's what your motion is getting at.
Okay, so as it stands now, we do review on a quarterly basis the WRF budget cost reports. So collectively, do we feel as a committee that we, based on the information we're getting now, because if we need more information to do that job and we don't know we're going to get it, we have to think of that. But based on where we are now and the information we've been getting, do we feel we add value and that we have the information we need to review at a high level the WRF quarterly reports?
I'm going to, you got to back up and vote on your previous motion.
Okay.
So we don't get too many motions on the floor here.
All right,
So
all
the
right.
motion that Mr. Bose made and was seconded by you to ask for changes to the quarterly report, and that's not exactly how you phrased it. You should vote on that one before you go to a next discussion, or have discussion
Or
on that.
rescind the motion or something.
Or rescind the motion.
I support the concept. I think what Bill's trying to do is make a preemptory go at stopping the discussion at the next meeting. If we've agreed that we're going to try to be a little more rigorous on an item-by-item basis, then we probably wouldn't need to do that. Or we have a subcommittee that meets before and then would bring sort of a document. And I think like in the WRFCAT case or in this, to me that would make sense, as there used to be a subcommittee on WRFCAT for finance. So I would support that. But the motion is, why is this different, I guess, Bill, than we're agreeing that we should formalize something like was done here. So what we could do is do the same thing. We get the quarterly report before the meeting, so we could do what Homer did and bring in a document that could be marked up.
The only thing I was trying to do with this is, obviously, we're reviewing financial reports, and this was we don't need to put this here, but I know we have not been satisfied with the milestone schedule that's been presented to us in the reports in the last quarter. Hopefully, it'll be better this next time. I've asked for a draft. I hope to see a draft, because it's pretty easy just to get it out of Microsoft Project with the WRF, but they haven't done that yet. So if we don't, any discussion, if people don't want to vote on it, then we can just I'll call the motion.
I am really sensing that an ad hoc might be the way to go here. We have a couple of people who are extremely interested and might bring value to our, and so we don't have these long discussions during CFAC. And I just a thought.
Well, I
Fair
can
enough.
pull the motion. Can I do that? Or do we need
I
to?
would rescind it. It doesn't mean you can't put it back on. I'd recommend you rescind it because I think we're getting a little ahead of
Okay.
ourselves.
Right.
So would this
Rescind.
subcommittee have staff responding to it and using staff time and Carlos time for this? Just curious.
Well, let's go to the motion.
What would
Can
be
he
the purpose
rescind
of
that
the
so we
subcommittee?
can?
Yeah.
I guess I don't understand.
Yeah. What would be the purpose of the subcommittee?
Well, the purpose of the subcommittee would be, I would like the subcommittee to meet with Paul Donnelly, and we could probably do that anyway if we got a subcommittee. And when we get the quarterly report, as we already do, I mean, we're not doing it as a formal subcommittee, but Bart and I get together, talk about it. There's a lot to review. Be very nice then to make, if there are some questions, a simple telephone call to Eric, and probably get an answer, and then we can come back and say, here's what we found in the quarterly report. And we're satisfied.
I sense that we might get some pushback. I would like to limit this to saying if we could form a subcommittee, we could consolidate what we can see in that report and formalize questions. As soon as we get into this other, then I've been admonished by the city council to not meet with these people because it costs money. I think we can get a lot accomplished if we could meet and review this, summarize our concerns and thoughts, and present them. We can present them early, so again, we're not going through an hour and a half of these nitpicky little things that we happen to have interest in. So if we could just get the agreement to have a subcommittee, we'd move this ball a long ways along, and then say, no, we're not saying that we're going to have a separate meeting with Eric or Scott. I guess Rob's still involved. I thought that he wasn't going to be, but I guess I misunderstood when that happened. But if we can say, let's have a subcommittee, I think that would be fantastic.
So the motion that was on the floor was rescinded, correct? And the seconder agreed as well? Okay, so back to the high level, does the committee want to make a motion on continuing to review the WARF financials? I think let's start there.
This is all recommendations to them.
Right, there's recommendations to the ad hoc committee.
Nobody
Do you want to recommend that you continue reviewing the WARF financials?
I think the recommendation would be to stop it, because we are doing it. We don't need a recommendation to keep doing what we're doing.
Okay, are you clear on what that role is?
Well,
So can there be a recommendation on clarifying what that means?
Yeah, that would be great. Maybe introduce the discussion. If we're going to look only at the quarterly report, we have very little to no visibility as to what the costs will be in the future. So any contract, large contract or contract amendment, which contracts do include costs, what the future costs are. And we should be looking at that as well. That's, I don't want to put it in the form of amendment, but maybe we should talk about that.
Can I make a suggestion? That we recommend to actually to the full city council that the motion they made on January 8th regarding our involvement with the financial aspects be clarified and our duties spelled out exactly what our duties are to be. Because once we hear from them on that, then that's it. God's law, right?
Well, Red Davis back in January made that, and then a couple of 3 city council meetings ago, he again reiterated that he said he's confused what is the role of the CFAC, and that should be clarified. Right. And who better than the CFAC to go ahead and propose what we should be doing, rather than the city council saying, I want you to do A, B, C, D. And a simple, right now we look at financials, that's easy to describe. And the only change I would make is that they should then have us be looking at large contracts, whatever large is. That can be, the city council can determine that, or the city manager. Take a look at large contracts or contract amendments to look at costs in the future, so we can get a better understanding and have confidence what the future costs will be, so we can alert the city council and the city manager if it looks like they're going to exceed the $126 million budget.
Okay, Bill, but I think some of us are confused a little bit on the role we should be performing, and we're trying to give a recommendation to the subcommittee. So therefore, we should not be telling them what we should be doing. We serve at the pleasure of City Council, whether we like that or not. That's always been stated in the advisory bylaws and when we apply for the position. So therefore, I believe we need them to tell us what our role is and what level of detail so we can perform that role. In other words, is it a high-level review? Is it just financial quarterly reports, or is it every single contract over $50,000 or X or whatever?
Right now, the council is having you review the quarterly reports. That's
okay.
It. So if you wanted to do more, you need to tell the ad hoc committee that's what you want.
Okay.
Okay, so I think Bill's on the right track. If you want to ask the ad hoc committee for this committee or some blending of subcommittee or a joint meeting with the WRF-CAC to review contracts over $1 million, amendments or new contracts, this is your opportunity to do that. I would say this is your best opportunity to do
Thank you, Scott. But you did say, do we still want to do the WRF? So I'm assuming we still all want to do that. I haven't heard anybody make a motion, or maybe somebody will, that we just drop it. That's,
Well, I'll make a motion that it'll get rejected to get it on the record. I make a motion that we transfer the review of the quarterly reports to the WRF committee immediately.
Okay, is there a second to that motion? I'll second it. I'm on the WRF. All right. Get it either way. All right. Any discussion on that?
I very strongly disagree with that. I think that if the council truly wants to have input, comments from citizenry about costs associated with WRF to try to keep it within the $126 million budget, then I think we can add a lot of value. There was logic to putting it to this group. Bill's been added, Lois has been added, with a lot of interest. So I think we add a lot of value, and I strongly would vote against this motion.
Okay. Any other discussion?
I agree with Bart. I mean, part of the other dilemma is the WRF-CAC meets so seldom. And at least the one good thing about, not one, but the CFAC does meet on a monthly basis. And we get monthly, or the city council gets monthly reports, but we get to see those in the agenda for the city council meeting, so we can stay up on that. I think the idea of having, as Lois pointed out, just get a small group of us, a subcommittee, assigned to go ahead and work and bring back to the CFAC information recommendations on the financial report before we discuss it, because as Lois points out, these meetings are not structured such that you have enough time to go into much detail at all.
Okay, but we're discussing the motion that Homer had right now on the table. Anybody else want to comment on that? Or all right, vote all in favor. What? I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh, restate the motion. Homer, go ahead, restate.
Didn't you write it down? I would make a motion that the CFAC discontinue receiving the quarterly WRF reports and transfer that responsibility back to the WRF Citizens Advisory Committee immediately.
And Barbara seconded it. All right. Okay. Let's do a roll call vote. Start with Bill.
No.
Lois?
No.
I'm going to abstain.
No.
I wanted this to be 1 to 5. Yes.
No.
Okay. So it's 4 no's, 1 yes, and 1 abstain.
I move that we form a subcommittee of 2 or 3 of us to go into deeper looks at the financial reports and other financial information.
I second.
Can I ask that you restate that to be a recommendation to the ad hoc committee to form an ad hoc committee? Because remember, this is all going back to the council subcommittee for review.
I guess I don't understand why this is a recommendation. We're just having how we...
The item is specifically stated to provide recommendations to the council ad hoc committee overseeing your, well, actually the entire review of all advisory bodies. So if you want to talk about general direction to the council, you'd have to do that at a future meeting.
Yeah, who is this ad hoc committee? Is it 2 people? Are they going to be
It's
meeting?
Mayor Heading and Council Member McPherson.
Oh, Oh, so that is the ad hoc committee.
Subcommittee of the council.
Oh, so they're good, well,
Could put a future agenda.
yeah, so they've heard it all already, so, okay. So we don't even need a motion to do that. 2 people can just get together, or 3 people can get together and just do it, and we'll come back to the next meeting and save the paperwork.
Wait a minute. I just want to make sure, we can have a minority of this committee meet on anything they want and then just bring it back? If it's on an agenda item, right?
Any less than a majority can meet on items of interest to this committee, and you can have a discussion about what you want to see or how you're going to vote, whatever the case may be on that particular item. You just can't bring a fourth into the mix because then you're violating a Brown Act. So you can do that, but we're not going to participate in that. If you want staff participation in a subcommittee, you need to direct that to the ad hoc council subcommittee. I'm sorry this is confusing because they're saying subcommittee like 1,000 times.
Yeah.
It's a lot of layers here. So any recommendation you want to make today is going to go to Councilmember McPherson and Mayor Heading, and they're going to provide their overall recommendations to the full council sometime later this year regarding all the advisory committees, including this one. Yours has particular interest because of the wharf and really trying to get added definition from this committee so they can do their work of making recommendations to the full council.
Okay.
I say we give that a go next month. We try that next month. I think that could work. Basically, that's what we're saying. We just don't, it's not an official. And we'll get.
Well, clearly a dilemma that we have, the thing I'm trying to have us look at is large contracts, just to be able to get into the future.
I would just make that, I would make that recommendation now.
Yeah, okay.
And see if you have support amongst your colleagues.
Clearly, we can't do it as a group. It's too
Yes, you can.
But
You can make a recommendation.
no, I agree with you there, but the mechanics of it probably might require a subcommittee. But yeah, I make the motion that the responsibilities of the CFAC regarding the WRF include reviewing large contracts over some large amount to be determined, or large amendments to contracts, so we can get a look at costs forward.
Why don't you be specific about the amount?
Yeah. Like the WeWorks contract, that one ended up at a 50% increase was the amendment price. One of the WRFCAC members was kind of shocked. That's kind of alarming when you have
But that was asked and answered, too, at the WRFCAC meeting.
Pardon me?
That
Yeah.
was discussed and answered.
No, it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
It was. But an example, so I would think anything over $1 million seems like a reasonable number, but then it could be like that was a $1.6 million contract that had, or $1.3 million contract that had a $600,000 increase. But
So, Bill, just to clarify, are you saying this contract could be several hundred pages and it could include the city's boilerplate terms and conditions and everything? Are you saying before this is negotiated, it should come here for detailed review, or we should just be aware of it after?
No, I'm just saying, what the responsibilities of CFAC are right now that were stated by what Homer read from the minutes of the meeting, we're to look at financials. I'm just saying the CFAC should also look at large contracts and large amendments over $1 million.
So there's a motion right now that this committee should look at large contracts and large contract amendments, with large being defined as 1 million or more, before they go to council. We need a second on that to have discussion.
I second with your change. We are recommending to we are recommending
to, thank
the
you.
ad hoc committee.
Thank you. So now you can have discussion on that.
Okay.
And again, the motion is recommending to the ad hoc committee that the CFAC committee review large contracts, large contract amendments defined as over $1 million before they go to council.
I have a concern about timing, about professional staff, legal counsel's role, a clearer definition, I guess, of the expectations of counsel with respect to contracts.
That's where I was going with that. In other words, are we going to review it before it's executed, after, look at it, or make advice on legal terms and conditions, et cetera, et cetera? I don't understand what look at means.
This is before, obviously, it being signed, before City Council gets to approve it. It just becomes an input to City Council and City Manager, and that would be the role that the CFAC would provide. Clearly, as Lois points out, there's lots of issues. How do you do that? And when you're trying to help the city make sure you stay within $126 million, how do you end up doing that? There are many pieces of that.
Okay, so we have a motion, and did we have a second to that?
Yeah.
Bart? Okay, thank you. All right, further discussion? That's, again, the recommendation of the ad hoc committee.
I just want, what happens if the timing isn't right and we delay the city council seeing the contract by 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever?
More costs.
How can the timing not be right? I mean, clearly, Rob, I don't know when he got the first look at the Corolla amendment. When that amendment comes in, if the two people, if you have a subcommittee, hey, take a look at it. You got the amendment, the Corolla amendment, I printed out how many hours and what the dollar cost is year by year. I mean, it's a good thing to look at. And just to say, we don't see a problem. Doesn't cost the city any money, no staff time, a couple of people going to look at it.
I'm not suggesting that, but if it's a requirement that we review the contract prior to going to the city council, Lois is going to say this better than I can.
I can add when possible. Qualifier.
Okay.
My thought is this is an important, you're absolutely right, it's extremely important. But management's job is if you're going to spend more here, you have to reduce somewhere else. So should we look at it in CFAC? Does it have a financial impact? And the answer is yes. What we should be doing is just making sure that it's rebalanced. And so I don't disagree with you. I just disagree with the timing, that it be before. Well, yes, it does have value. In my opinion, the value is, has it been rebalanced? So I think it's a very valid point. It's just a question of, is that our role or is that someone else's role? And is our role to just make sure we're still going to come in right, regardless of the fact that there's an adjustment? So that's my point.
I have a question for Bill. Bill, when you were managing contracts and projects, did you have committees overseeing or second-guessing your decisions?
Of course. I mean, all the way up to the president. I mean, yes.
And
you had House committees, Senate committees, you had DOD committees, you had operational committees, you had fleet commander committees. Yes, people look at what you're doing.
And did those processes ever delay your projects?
Well, of course not. I mean, of course, some of them would. If you had to get the money, you had to go prove something. That's not what I'm just saying. As Mr. Collins said, when possible, when feasible, take a look at contracts. If we don't have time, we don't do it. It becomes another element. If the responsibility of the CFAC is to look at the financials, what does that mean? That means, obviously, how much money has been spent and how much money is going to be spent. And how do you predict the amount of money that's going to be spent in the future if you don't have any idea what the contracts are? And it's just another way for the CFAC to provide a function of value that doesn't cost the city any money, and we can give input that might be useful to them.
And we can offer that, and they can take us up on it or not. My experience in the IT contracts is that people so often think, oh, it's just the money, I can look at this chart. But when I look at hundreds of pages and the impact of the terms and conditions, it's not a simple thing to do. And that's where I think we have people that aren't involved in this 8 hours a day performing an advisory role or looking over their shoulders, which is going to delay everything.
Can I make a recommendation? So on the issue of feasibility, WRFCAC meets at the beginning of the month, and this group meets sort of towards the end of the month. So we're going to create a delay by mere fact that the WRFCAC will review these contracts. Of course, they're looking at it from the technical standpoint, but they're not going to ignore the dollar amount. But if this was a joint committee meeting for significant, I would say more than $1 million, significant, like the last two major components of the project, you could avoid the trap of missing, or creating problems for timing.
Is the WRFCAC going to meet now on a monthly basis?
They don't meet on a monthly basis. They've been a special advisory committee since the beginning of time. They meet to review the last remaining technical components of the project, would primarily consist of the final designs of the facility, designs on the conveyance system, injection well system, and then the contracts themselves. And at which point, council will have to determine if there's a purpose for the WRFCAC.
Okay, so I think we need to vote on that recommendation if we want to make that recommendation.
We need to vote on the motion that's on the floor right now.
Or amend it.
Or amend it.
Okay.
Repeat what you have as the motion.
I have Member Bose move to recommend to the ad hoc committee the responsibility of CFAC regarding the WRF to include review of large contracts and large amendments to contracts, large mean $1 million or more, before they go to council. When possible, when feasible. I have Beckman seconding.
Okay, any further discussion? I think we've... All right, all in favor?
You can vote on that, or you can choose to amend it and add a joint meeting. Those are your two options.
Oh, okay, okay, thanks, Scott.
I would like to add the joint meeting.
I'll second that.
Yeah, I would be in favor of that as well.
So the maker and the seconder have to agree.
Are you okay with that, Bill, since
Yeah,
you
that's
made the
fine.
motion? Yeah.
And Mr.
you
Beckman
okay?
as the seconder.
All right, now are we ready to vote on that? All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. Bill, you were in favor. 5-1. Thanks, John.
Was that Mr. Martin that voted no?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, any further discussion on any recommendations or anything to the ad hoc committee? Okay, then future agenda items. Our future agenda items, I think, would be a update of one of the budget reports. Jennifer, what do we have on the future? We're not going to be ready for Measure Q.
Let's see, that will be October. So you will have, I'm still on that whole discussion.
Okay.
Let's see, October, you will have probably a preliminary Measure Q. I think we usually do something
Yeah, if we could do that to
fairly
get a head
preliminary.
start. Yeah, that'd be good.
And a WRF quarterly update.
Oh, that's right, because that would be September 30th.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
What's your all meeting?
We'll manage to stretch that out, don't worry.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second? Okay, favor? Pass.